like to discuss a little bit about a relational database. You have to understand how to create one and set one up. And in order to do that, you have to understand that Access is a DBMS, which is a database management system. It's also a relational database management system. And the way we do that is we store all our data in tables. And then we take these tables and relate them together. So when you're storing your data in tables, you have to identify that each row in the table represents a record. And a record is an entire entity, like it'll represent a person, a place, a specific object, an event, an idea. For example, if I had the hack ID, first name, middle initial, last name as my fields, and I started to enter every student's ID, first name, middle initial, last name, that is an individual record. Now, your tables are your rows or your records, your columns are your fields, and your fields are going to be identified by a unique field name, and your field should only contain one specific piece of data. So don't make a field called name and put the student's first name, middle initial, last name. You want to actually have 3 separate fields for that. You want to have first name field, a middle initial field, and a last name field. You only want to have one specific piece of data in each field. Now, each row is going to be uniquely identified, and you're going to do that by setting up a primary key. For our students table at Hack, you are uniquely identified by your Hack ID. The federal government sets up a table for every United States citizen by uniquely identifying you with a Social Security number. And you can set a primary key for each record so that each record then will be uniquely identified. There are times, though, that you're not going to have one field or one key, which is a field, that's going to uniquely identify. You may have to take 2 fields. And when you have 2 fields and create them as your primary key, they're called your concatenated or your composite key. Now we create our relationships between the 2 tables in the relationship window, and I'll describe that in a moment. But in order to have that, your related table has to have a common field with the primary table. And typically what we do is we take the primary key from the one table and we add it to the related table, and then we join those tables together with that common field. That field that is added to the related table is known as your foreign key field. Now, before I look at the relationships, we really should take a look at the steps to designing a relational database. The first step is determine the purpose of your database and the scope that you want to perform. So you really need to understand what do you want to do in this database. Once you understand what you're going to do in that database, you need to select your major objects, which means really look at what major tables are you going to have. If I was creating a database for Hack, I would have a student table, I have an instructor table, and I have my courses table, so that I have many instructors teaching many courses, and I have many students taking many courses. Okay? Once you know your tables, then you need to determine what fields are going to go in each table. In other words, specifically identify the details you're needed. Once you do that, you set the primary key, and then you determine what kind of data type and size each field is. You can add any restrictions by adding properties to the data, and then you want to create related tables and see how they are related together. Now, tables related together can form one of 3 relationships. They can have a one-to-one relationship, a one-to-many relationship, or a many-to-many relationship. A one-to-many relationship means that you have one record in one table relates to one record in the other table. A one-to-many relationship means that one record in the one table relates to many records in the many table, but that many table only comes back to the one. And the many-to-many relationship means you can have many records in one table relating to many records in another table. And what we need to do in order to relate the many-to-many table is you actually create I actually call it cheating. You create a table in which you take the primary key from both of those many tables and you create one separate table. And then once you do that, you join them together to create two one-to-many relationships. When you create your relationships, you have to recognize whether you want to enforce referential integrity and then decide whether you want to do any of the cascades, updates, or delete. When you enforce referential integrity, what you're doing is you're making sure that your data is accurate. So you're going to enforce the referential integrity, and let's just go ahead and take a look at that, and let me show you what I want you to take a look at to do. Okay, so I have an equipment table here, and this uniquely identifies every single equipment. My equipment can have many services. It could have update many service records. So I have many different services here. I'm going to take my equipment ID and drag it over into my equipment ID field here to enforce my referential, to set up my relationship. I'm going to force my referential integrity. I'm going to enforce cascade update and cascade delete and create. Now, what this is going to do is I'm not going to be able to add an equipment ID here in my service history until I'm not going to be able to add a record into this table unless that equipment ID is listed there. If I chose cascade update, if I update my equipment ID here, number here, it will automatically update in the service history. And then if I delete my equipment number here, it will also automatically delete it here. And that is enforcing referential integrity, cascade update, cascade deletes, and talking about relational databases.